It was a Tuesday morning draped in the soft hush of mist, the kind that rolls over the red clay roofs of Mokwar village like a mother's shawl, heavy with the scent of wet earth, wood smoke, and forgotten prayers. Roosters had crowed an hour ago, but the sun was reluctant, peeking only slightly through clouds thick as goat's milk. A chorus of life stirred, women balancing basins of laundry on their heads, grinding stones echoing like ancestral drums from behind mud walls, and children's bare feet slapping against the earth in pursuit of mangoes that had fallen overnight. And yet, amid this orchestrated rhythm of rural bustle, Kwame moved like a ghost among the living, seen but not seen. He wore a faded blue shirt, buttoned wrong at the collar, sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing calloused arms like dried riverbeds, evidence of a man who had wrestled life without reward. His sandals were worn unevenly, one strap tied hastily with twine, and in his eyes lived the exhaustion of 1,000 quiet nights spent staring at thatched ceilings, waiting for answers that never came. His voice was seldom used, like a forgotten drum, and when he spoke at the marketplace, it was only to whisper prices or offer greetings that returned to him like echoes in an empty cave. He arrived at the bazaar just as the fishmonger's laughter pierced the fog. Carts squeaked under the weight of maize, and the air thickened with pepper, sweat, and diesel. Kwame laid out his modest spread: 3 gourds, a few yams, and 1 tin of roasted groundnuts. Other vendors sneered under breath, and someone coughed out a laugh too loud, too cruel. A man with twin daughters, and only this to sell? Better he learns to beg properly. The words hung in the air like smoke, curling around Kwame's ears, but he said nothing. His daughters were waiting at home, and he carried their hunger with him like a stone in his chest. At 42, his back had started to betray him, and he had grown used to the slight limp in his right leg that deepened in the cold. What he never got used to was the way people averted their eyes when he passed. Some with guilt, others with disdain, as though his poverty was a disease they might catch if they looked too long. Women at the water well whispered about how his wife had left him. Ran off with that fat politician from Mbale, they said. Left him with 2 mouths to feed, and no land of his own. Children mimicked his limp in the alleys, and ran off laughing, yet Kwame never shouted, never struck, never even sighed aloud. His silence was his shield, thick and quiet as the fog that blanketed the village each dawn. And on this particular morning, something shifted. A boy bumped into his stall, spilling yams onto the mud. The boy apologized, but behind him, a group of boys snickered, and one muttered low enough to slice, but loud enough to scar, "Your mother didn't even want you." For the first time in many seasons, Kwame's jaw clenched, and his eyes flickered, not with anger, but a tired, buried flame. He said nothing, as always, but his silence this time was different. He crouched to pick up the yams, slowly, his fingers trembling, not from the cold, but from something deeper. There was a whisper in the air, like a distant drum. Something was coming. Something neither the mocking boys, nor the gossiping women, nor even Kwame himself could yet name. That same evening, when the shadows of the jacaranda trees stretched long, and the air turned thick with the promise of another rain, Kwame returned home to the small, leaning shack he called his house. It stood at the edge of the village, past the termite hills and the broken fence that no one had repaired since his wife left. The structure moaned when the wind blew too hard, its tin roof patched with flattened cooking oil cans and prayers. Inside, 2 small figures stirred beneath a frayed mosquito net, their laughter soft and hopeful, like birdsong in a storm. Afia and Amara, his twin girls, 8 years old, born only minutes apart but with personalities as different as dawn and dusk. Afia was fierce, always the first to speak, while Amara had the eyes of a sage and rarely wasted words. They ran to him the moment he stepped in, throwing their arms around his waist, clutching his worn shirt as though it were silk. "Baba, did you sell today?" Amara asked quietly. looking up at him with those wide, searching eyes that always seemed to see deeper than he wished. Kwame shook his head with a faint smile, crouching beside them. Not today, my stars, but tomorrow we try again. He always called them that, his stars. The only two things in the world that still gave him light. Dinner that night was half a sweet potato and boiled cassava leaves. But he made it into a feast, turning every bite into a game, telling stories of clever rabbits and greedy crocodiles that made the girls giggle even as their stomachs rumbled. They fell asleep soon after, curled on either side of him like question marks, their breathing soft and steady. Kwame stayed awake long after, staring into the thatch, listening to the distant howl of jackals and the aching silence between each wind gust. He hadn't told them that the landlord had come by that morning, had kicked the wall with his boot, and spat at the doorstep. 2 weeks, he growled, or I throw you and your little beggars out myself. Kwame had nodded, bowing slightly, the shame a bitter taste in his mouth. He had nothing left to pawn. His wife had taken the last of their wedding gifts with her, the brass earrings his grandmother gave, the hand-carved stool from his father's hut. Even the chickens were gone, gone with the scent of her perfume and the echo of her laugh, a sound he had once built dreams around. Nia had been his first love. She wore beauty like a flame, and when they married, Kwame believed it would be enough to keep them warm through anything. But poverty doesn't just strip the belly, it eats the heart. Nia had grown quiet, then bitter, then distant. After the twins were born, the rations stretched thinner. Kwame worked dawn till dusk, hauling sacks for farmers, chasing contracts that never came. And one day, he returned to find her gone. No note, just the whisper of her name and the slam of an oiled car door down the hill. Some said she was in Mbale now, living in a blue house with a satellite dish and gold bangles that clinked when she laughed. Others said she regretted nothing, not even the girls. Kwame never asked. What mattered was that they were gone, and he remained. With 2 daughters, a broken roof, and hands too worn to rest. The weeks blurred into one another. He patched sandals for schoolboys in exchange for bananas. He gathered firewood, chopped it in neat bundles, and left it by doors, hoping someone would leave coins. But even desperation wears thin after a while, and the village began to look through him again. His daughters walked barefoot to school, their uniforms faded but clean. He had taught them dignity, even in hunger. You are my legacy, he would whisper each night, kissing their foreheads. You are made of stardust and iron. But the world was not kind to dreamers, and it mocked those who dared believe they were meant for more. Then one night, something cracked. Afia came home crying, her knees scraped, her books soaked. A boy had thrown her school bag into a puddle and called her daughter of the cursed man. Kwame's heart twisted, but she wiped her own tears. I hit him back, she said. I told him we'll be more than all of them one day. Her voice didn't tremble. That night, as the girls slept, Kwame sat outside under the moon, the air still impregnant with thoughts he had buried for too long. There was a piece of him that had once been something, a dreamer, a storyteller, a craftsman. He used to carve once, small animals out of wood, fine enough to sell in markets near the border. But when hunger came, there was no time for art. Still, he remembered the feeling, the way his hands danced when they shaped something from nothing. The next morning, with only 2 coins left in his pocket, Kwame walked to the abandoned part of the village, where termites and time had claimed most things. There, he found old wood, broken stools, chair legs, the forgotten skeletons of better days. He gathered them quietly and brought them home. The girls watched silently as he began to work, stripping, sanding, carving. It started as a way to keep busy, but soon the rhythm took over. His fingers remembered. His heart began to hum. By the 3rd week, he had carved 6 animals, a lion, a gazelle, a snake curled in dance. The twins painted them with juice from crushed hibiscus petals and charcoal soot. They began to sell. slowly at first, at the far end of the market near the bus stop. Curious travelers picked them up. A tourist from Nairobi offered to buy 3 for her shop. "These are beautiful," she said, surprised. "Who made them?" Kwame only smiled, eyes lowered. "Just a father." Word began to spread. Orders trickled in. One day, a man in a clean suit and thick accent stopped by their stall. He was from the city, said he ran a small export company. Asked if Kwame could make more, maybe 50 pieces in a month. Kwame hesitated. 50? His tools were few, and his back still ached with every sunrise. But the girls squeezed his hand. "We can help," they said in unison, their eyes bright, their belief unwavering. So he said yes. Nights turned into workshops. The girls took turns cooking porridge and soaking paintbrushes. They began to write ideas, sketch patterns, talk of packaging. The house, once full of silence, now pulsed with hope. But just as light returned, so too did the shadows. Nia appeared one afternoon. The same blue dress, gold earrings, a phone in her hand, and a question in her eyes. I heard you're doing well now," she said, not quite looking at him. Afia's face turned to stone. Amara's eyes narrowed. Nia reached for them, hesitated. "I made mistakes," she whispered, "but I'm still their mother." Kwame didn't speak. He studied her, this woman who had once held his whole heart, and now stood like a stranger at his door. Behind him, the smell of wood shavings drifted from their little workshop, where the twins had left a half-carved elephant drying in the sun. And in that moment, a quiet storm began to rise. Kwame stood still at the doorway, the wind rustling the frayed curtain behind him like an uncertain whisper from the ancestors. Nia's voice hung in the air, brittle and sweet, like sugar cane left too long in the sun. "I made mistakes," she repeated, as if saying it softly enough could fold time and erase the years of absence. The twins stood behind Kwame now, their small fingers clutching the back of his shirt, not in fear, but in protest. Afia's eyes burned with the quiet fury of betrayal, while Amara stared at their mother as though trying to remember a face that had never stayed long enough to be memorized. "You left," Afia said flatly, her voice not that of a child, but of someone who had learned too early what it means to be discarded. "You didn't even say goodbye." Nia blinked, her mouth parting slightly, but no words came. There was no apology big enough to fit the hollowness she'd left behind. Kwame cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice was low, calm, but laced with the weight of years. "We survived, Nia. Without your hands, without your help. We built something from ash." He stepped aside slightly, letting her glimpse into the room behind him, the shelves now lined with hand-carved animals, drying paints, notebooks with scribbled dreams. A space that had once echoed with silence now buzzed with life. "Why are you here now?" he asked gently, not accusingly, just with a tired honesty. Nia hesitated, then sighed. Things didn't work out. I thought I had made the right choice, but he left too." Her voice cracked, but none of them flinched. "I have nothing, not even a room to sleep in." It was a confession, not a plea. And for a brief moment, Kwame's heart flickered, because once, long ago, he had loved her. But time does not rewind, and betrayal doesn't unburn. Still, he was not a cruel man. "You can sleep here tonight," he said. "There's space in the corner." The twins said nothing, though their eyes followed her with the quiet caution of cubs studying a lioness. That night, the house was heavy with a silence too thick for sleep. Nia curled in the far corner, wrapped in a spare kitenge. Kwame lay awake, memories flooding in, of her laughter at their wedding, of how she danced barefoot beneath the mango tree, of the moment she left and didn't look back. He wasn't bitter anymore, but he wasn't blind. The next day came like a breath held too long. Kwame packed the carvings for delivery, his biggest order yet. 80 animals going to Nairobi. A shop in Westlands had agreed to sell them exclusively. The money would cover the rent, tools, and school fees for the twins for a whole year. It was the beginning of something real. Nia watched from the doorway, eyes wide, arms folded. "You're doing all this with carvings?" she asked, almost in disbelief. "People are buying them like that." Kwame nodded, tying the sacks shut. "Because they're made with purpose, and pain, and patience." He didn't add, "all the things you left behind." A few days later, a storm broke over Mwakwar like a prophecy. Thunder cracking across the sky, rain pouring down in wild sheets. Kwame had just finished a new order when he felt the sharp twist in his back, a jolt so fierce it sent him collapsing to the ground. He couldn't move. His leg, the one that had limped for years, now screamed with agony. The twins rushed to him, panic rising in their throats. "Baba! Baba!" Amara cried, grabbing his hand. Nia ran too, her face pale, but Kwame could barely speak, the pain choking every breath. For days he lay motionless, fevered, weak. The doctor from the next village came and said the words like a blade. "His spine is inflamed. He needs rest. No lifting, no carving. Not for weeks, maybe longer." The workshop fell silent. Orders piled up. The city man called twice, then stopped. Kwame lay in the dark, watching the roof drip water into a tin bowl, his soul crumbling beneath the weight of helplessness. Everything he had built, everything, was slipping again. He tried not to cry in front of the girls, but sometimes the tears came anyway, quiet and bitter. "Baba, let us carve," Amara said one night. "You've taught us. We know." Kwame shook his head weakly. "It's not that simple. There's so much to finish. You're just children." But they didn't listen. For the next week, the girls rose before dawn and worked late into the night. Afia took to carving, the shape of antelopes and elephants flowing from her hands like she'd been born for it. Amara handled the painting and finishing, her strokes delicate, precise. Nia, too, helped, at first awkwardly, then with growing determination. She polished, she cleaned, she wrapped the pieces in cloth with trembling hands. It was not redemption, but it was something. And when the next order was due, the girls stood before Kwame's bed with 25 completed figures, faces beaming. "We did it, Baba," they said. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." Kwame stared at their work, his eyes welling up, not from pain, but from something deeper. Pride, awe, and the gut-wrenching truth that perhaps he had never really been alone. Perhaps his greatest creation wasn't the animals or the business, but them. The following weeks moved like honey, slow, golden, and heavy with meaning. Kwame remained on his mat, wrapped in a blanket the twins had woven from scraps, while the small house transformed into something brighter, almost unrecognizable. The girls worked with purpose, their hands steady, their hearts synchronized. Where once there was silence and survival, now there was rhythm. Even Nia, once restless and distant, began to hum as she polished carvings and boiled tea, sweeping the dusty floor with more care than she had once shown in a lifetime. She didn't speak much, perhaps out of guilt or shame, but she was present, and in her quietness there was atonement. The girls delivered their first independent order to the city man without their father. They wore dresses too short at the ankles, but their eyes gleamed with fire. "Our Baba is unwell," Afia told him boldly, "but we are not weak." The man laughed, but with respect. "You girls have your father's hands." He handed over the money and placed another order on the spot. "This time, triple the size." "I'll send someone to collect them next month," he added. "The tourists love your work, especially the lion with the broken tail. They say it feels real." And it was. Every imperfection in their art bore witness to the life they had lived. Nothing about their success was polished or easy, but it was honest, and people felt that. Back in Muakware, neighbors began to notice. The same ones who had whispered and mocked now stopped outside Kwame's home to peek in. Some even asked for help. "Could you show my son how to carve?" Or, "Maybe your girls can speak to my daughter. She's lost her way." Kwame didn't gloat. He only smiled, his face thinner but lit with quiet joy. He watched from his mat as the girls managed the orders, balanced schoolwork, and even painted a wooden sign to hang outside. Twins of the Baobab, art that tells our story. They'd chosen the name because there was a giant baobab tree just behind their home, one that had stood for generations and never once fallen, no matter the storm. "Like us," Amara said, "we bend, but we don't break." By the end of the month, a local radio station picked up their story. Then a journalist from Kampala visited and wrote a piece titled "The Daughters Who Carved Their Way Out." That was the beginning of the flood. Calls, emails, visitors with cameras and promises. A partnership was proposed with a cultural museum in Nairobi. An art school in Ghana offered the girls a scholarship. A crowdfunding page was created quietly by a teacher, and within days, thousands of people donated to support their dream. Suddenly, this tiny home at the edge of a forgotten village became the epicenter of something profound, proof that resilience, born in silence and nurtured in suffering, could bloom into legacy. Kwame wept the day he stood again on his feet, not from pain, but because he could finally walk into the workshop and see what his daughters had built in his name. "This was supposed to be my gift to you," he whispered, touching the edge of a carved eagle. Afia looked up from her stool. "But we are your gift, Baba. And this?" She swept her hand across the shelves, the tools, the orders stacked neatly. "This is ours together." Even Nia, once a ghost in their lives, had changed. She spoke more now, never of the past, but of what could be. She helped where she could, offered to manage shipments, and asked once, quietly, if she might stay longer. Kwame didn't give her an answer. He didn't need to. Life would decide. One evening, just as the sun kissed the hills, and the village children chased each other with glowing fireflies cupped in their palms, Kwame stood outside with the twins. They looked out toward the horizon, where a road led away from the village and into the unknown. "One day," Amara said, "we'll have our own school, Baba." "For girls like us, who were forgotten?" Kwame nodded slowly. "And boys," Afia added with a grin, "but only if they behave." The three of them laughed then, their joy echoing through the trees like a song long buried but finally remembered. And behind them, the baobab stood tall, silent, ancient, unshaken. Years passed the way dry leaves fall from a tree. Quietly, steadily, without fanfare, Mwakwer changed, though not in ways the world outside would notice. The roads were still dusty. The air still carried the scent of wood smoke and ripening mangoes. But now, laughter flowed more freely from the home beneath the baobab. The twins, once barefoot and shy beneath threadbare dresses, now wore confidence like a second skin. Afia grew into a sculptor whose hands captured motion and stillness. Amara, ever observant, became the designer, the one who told their stories through form, color, and fire. Their names began to appear in places Kwame had only heard of in passing: Lagos, Johannesburg, Accra. Invitations came on thick envelopes embossed with golden stamps. Awards followed. Their sculptures were displayed beside the works of men whose names came from wealth, not hunger, but the twins never forgot. They always carved the lion with the broken tail, always left one carving unsigned, just as their father had taught them. "It's not about who made it," Amara would say to the press, "but about why it was made." Kwame, his beard grayer now and his steps slower, walked without a limp. The girls had insisted on proper treatment after their first exhibition sale in Nairobi. They had even taken him on a plane once. He laughed so hard during takeoff that the stewardess gave him extra peanuts just to calm him. He stood taller now, not because the world gave him more, but because his daughters had built something even his dreams had not dared imagine. Nia still lived in the village too, quietly. She never reclaimed the word wife, nor did she try to undo what time had already carved in stone, but she stayed. She became a helper at the new center the girls built, a clay-roofed building beside the baobab where they trained other children, especially girls, to carve, paint, dream. Nia ran the small kitchen, served warm maize porridge in the mornings, and often wiped the faces of children who arrived with dust in their eyes and hope in their hearts. It wasn't redemption, but it was real. The workshop, now expanded, carried a sign etched into solid mahogany: Twins of the Baobab, from ash we rise. Inside, the hum of carving tools mixed with the soft chatter of girls who spoke in many tongues, but shared the same story: abandonment, struggle, discovery. Some came from slums, others from dusty towns with no names on maps. But here, under Kwame's watchful eye and the girls' patient hands, they learned that creation was more than survival. It was legacy. Once, a journalist asked Kwame how he had raised such extraordinary daughters. He chuckled, adjusted his faded cap, and said, "I didn't raise them. We raised each other." And perhaps that was the truth. The twins had pulled him out of despair, just as he had pulled them from the edge of neglect. They were stars in orbit, burning, distant, but always drawn back to each other. One morning, as the sun poured over the village in soft orange light, a ceremony was held beneath the baobab. A bench had been carved and placed there, simple but elegant, with the initials KK etched in the center. It was not a memorial. Kwame was still very much alive, but a tribute. The twins presented it to him with tears in their eyes. "This is where you waited for us after school," Afia said. "Where you fixed our sandals, where you told us stories, even when your heart was broken." Kwame sat down slowly, touched the wood with reverence, and smiled. "I was just a man trying to hold the world together," he said softly. "But you, both of you became the world." The villagers gathered, not out of curiosity this time, but out of pride. Some brought food, others sang. The children danced in a circle, their laughter rising like incense to the heavens. And there, seated beneath the old baobab, whose roots ran deep into the earth like memory itself, Kwame closed his eyes and listened. To the wind, to the breath of his daughters, to the sound of the life they had built. He remembered the day Nia left, the emptiness of their little home, the whispered insults in the marketplace. He remembered carrying bundles of firewood while others looked away. But none of that mattered now, not because it hadn't shaped him. It had, but because it had led him here, to this moment, to legacy. And as dusk fell gently over Mwakware, with fireflies lighting up the sky like ancient spirits dancing their approval, Kwame whispered into the twilight, "She abandoned us, but the world came back through you." And the stars, above and beside him, burned ever brighter.